At 6, Boris Johnson says he takes personal responsibility for the Conservatives' crushing defeat in the North Shropshire by-election.
3, 2, 1.
A safe Tory seat for almost 200 years. Their huge majority was wiped out by the Liberal Democrats after a turbulent few weeks for the Prime Minister.
Boris Johnson, the party is over. Your government, run on lies and bluster, will be held accountable. It will be scrutinised, it will be challenged, and it can and will be defeated.
Clearly, the vote in North Shropshire is a very disappointing result, and I totally understand people's frustrations.
We'll be gauging reaction as some Tory backbenchers say they are questioning the Prime Minister's leadership. Also on the programme, another day, another record. More than 93,000 new cases of coronavirus recorded in the UK in the past 24 hours. 4 young boys killed in a fire in South London. A 27-year-old woman has been arrested on suspicion of child neglect. Cancelled by COVID, Manchester United are just one of several Premier League teams that won't be playing this weekend. And the TV presenter AJ Odudu won't be dancing tomorrow night. She's been forced to pull out of the Strictly final after tearing a ligament in her ankle.
And in Sports Day at 6:30 on the BBC News Channel, England endure another difficult day in the Ashes, with victory in the second test looking increasingly unlikely.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. Boris Johnson says he takes personal responsibility for the Conservatives' crushing defeat in the North Shropshire by-election. The Liberal Democrats overturned a huge Conservative majority of almost 23,000 and won by nearly 6,000 votes. The shock result follows a torrid week for the Prime Minister, who has faced criticism over Downing Street parties and a rebellion by his own MPs over COVID measures. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, reports.
2, 1.
They might not do subtle.
It turns out that if you take the people for granted, there is a price to pay.
But there was nothing subtle about the Lib Dems' dramatic burst of the Tory bubble in this by-election. Thousands upon thousands of voters switched sides. Anger with the Conservatives means a new Lib Dem is on their way to the Commons.
I think this is a watershed moment, and I think we brought new hope to the whole nation, who've been so worried and fed up with Boris Johnson. We've now beaten the Conservatives in 2 of their safest seats this year.
That may be ambitious, but at about 4:15 a.m, the Liberal Democrats smashed what had been a Tory majority of over 20,000 in North Shropshire. Tired but jubilant after weeks of claims of sleaze and misbehaviour in Downing Street.
Boris Johnson, the party is over.
Thank you very much.
Many of the Prime Minister's MPs pin the blame for this staggering result on the chaos under his roof. Does he?
I'm responsible for everything that the government does, and of course I take a personal responsibility. What people have been hearing is just a constant litany of stuff about politics and politicians and stuff that isn't about them.
Yet there's more. It emerged this man's team, Simon Case, the most senior civil servant in the country, had a virtual quiz in the office called a Christmas party in lockdown. He's the one investigating the Whitehall parties. That seems unlikely to last.
232.
The mess began when the government tried to change the rules on MPs' behaviour when a Tory was found to have broken them.
Forgive my absence during some of the morning.
Unleashing a torrent of claims about big money for second jobs. Then, the cringe-worthy footage of Number 10 staff joking about their Christmas party. Then on Tuesday, the biggest rebellion of this government so far. Boris Johnson is no stranger to drama, to epic highs and chaotic lows. But the political danger to him right now is real and intense. Being pounded by voters in what should be the safest of Tory seats is the finale of a terrible month, brought about in part by a series of mistakes and misjudgments in Number 10 itself. There are strong public and fierce private calls for him to change how he does business, and warnings tonight of what might happen if he does not or cannot.
Prime Minister is now in last orders time. 2 strikes already, 1 earlier this week in the vote in the Commons, now this, 1 more strike and he's out.
Prime Minister's always had enemies inside, but a former leader who backs him warns he has to change.
He is our leader and he will lead us to the next election.
He will, are you sure of that?
But as long as he wishes to do it, he has the right to do it. The party has to get behind him and he has to deliver on the basis that Downing Street and the departments are themselves structured and disciplined. That will be the key litmus test.
I mean, you're essentially saying he has to change and he has to make sure that the way his government operates has to change, or else.
Well, that is always the signal sent by the public when they feel that things have gone wrong. And the answer to that is very simple. It's not more of the same.
Number 10 may take some comfort from the fact this by-election was a Lib Dem, not a Labour breakthrough. But the cold reality, it's the Prime Minister who has been put on notice. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Downing Street.
So, for the first time since 1832, North Shropshire no longer has a Conservative MP. Our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth, has been speaking to voters there, finding what made so many of them change their mind.
As the sun came up, North Shropshire awoke to a new political landscape.
Liberal Democrats, 17,957.
This solid Tory turf had been shaken. By mid-morning, the Lib Dem victor had arrived in Oswestry to much fanfare. As they celebrated, onlookers contemplated what had happened and why.
I'm not a big fan of Boris Johnson. He's disappointed all of us.
Not everyone was thrilled the Conservatives had lost.
It's very sad when you think they've held it for 200 years nearly.
But for others, it was a moment to mark.
I'm very happy because it smacked Boris in the face.
Why did you vote for them?
To get Boris out.
Why?
Just all the parties and everything that they've been having. Because I lost a sister through COVID.
There is clear anger here at recent events in Westminster, and that fueled the Lib Dem campaign. But for some, it runs deeper. Saffron's grandfather was a Conservative MP for North Shropshire. He says he understands why people turned away from the party.
It's part of a national mood, but I think also it's a mood that is here as well.
You know, taken for granted that we'd always be Conservative.
For this councillor and long-standing Tory member, it was a combination, recent events and the broader approach.
What's coming out in number 10 is beyond the control of North Shropshire.
What do you hope the National Party takes away from this?
That they can't take anything for granted. Maybe they forgot their heartlands a bit.
Just 2 years ago, Boris Johnson won a landslide at the general election, charging through old Labour areas in the Midlands and north of England. The question is, can he deliver for those new Tory voters without leaving more traditional supporters in places like this feeling overlooked?
Paul certainly feels that way. A local dairy farmer, he backed the Lib Dems for the first time, having voted Conservative all his life.
They want to look at themselves hard and long and say, look, we need to get our act together and support businesses more and farming as well, from my own personal point of view. But I feel they really have let us down.
Of course, this was a victory in a single election in particular circumstances. But it is a sign for the Conservatives that something is broken. How they respond could determine how long the damage lasts.
Well, the Lib Dems threw everything at this campaign. They bussed in hundreds of activists. They dropped thousands of leaflets through doors. They managed to portray themselves as the main challengers to the Conservatives, and it paid off. Of course, there are questions about whether they could replicate that effort in a general election. There are questions about whether Labour might have pushed harder here. But the real questions tonight are for the Conservative Party. You can argue over the reasons why. You can argue over whether this was a one-off or something more sustained. But the bottom line is there's been a direct message from the voters of North Shropshire to Downing Street, and that is one of deep unhappiness.
Alex, thank you. For the third day in a row, the UK has had a record number of new coronavirus infections. Just over 93,000 have been recorded in the past 24 hours. That's a rise of almost 40% in a week. In Scotland, Omicron has become the dominant strain of COVID. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said the tsunami of cases she predicted last week is starting. Coronavirus cases are surging across other parts of Europe too. Denmark is closing theatres and cinemas and restricting restaurant opening hours after record cases there. France is also dealing with a rapid rise in cases. At 11 o'clock tonight, British time, France is closing its borders to most British travellers to try to slow the spread of Omicron. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
Boosting in Barnsley.
Straight through this door and to the right.
A walk-in centre set up yesterday. Unlike at many other sites this week, there's no queuing.
We've got a lot of vaccinators on site and a lot of admin support, so patients are getting a really good experience. They are in, they are out and away.
Emily was one local resident who took advantage of the booster offer.
We saw the signs up for the booster thing and they said the queue was low, so we thought we'd go for it and get in early.
There was a big queue at a Clydebank vaccine centre today, as the First Minister said that Omicron was now the dominant strain of the virus in Scotland and warned people again to limit social mixing.
If what matters most to you is spending time with your loved ones on Christmas Day, and I think that's what matters right now to most to many of us, don't risk that by going out before then and possibly catching COVID. Because the reality is, if you are mixing with others just now, getting this virus is a real and increasing risk.
The spread of Omicron in the UK has led to a French government travel ban on British tourists from 11 p.m. tonight. Visitors will need a compelling reason to enter France. The virus is already putting pressure on the French health system, with a new wave of cases.
The hospital ICU is currently at full capacity as patients have been coming in for the past 20 days. 70% of the ICU patients are positive COVID cases.
Concerns are growing around Europe. The UK's overall COVID case rate relative to the population has gone up sharply, but France is not that far behind. And Denmark in recent days has seen a steep increase, and that's been linked to Omicron. The Danish government is proposing new restrictions, including closing theatres and cinemas and limiting the numbers of people in shops. There were warnings too from the European Commission President.
We know that the Omicron variant is really threatening us. It is spreading at a ferocious pace and potentially has the risk of escaping our vaccines, at least partially.
But there's more positive news on the impact of boosters on Omicron. A preliminary UK study suggests they may be as much as 85% effective in preventing people needing hospital treatment. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
And in the last few minutes, Ireland has just announced tighter restrictions as well until the end of January, including bars and restaurants, which will have to close by 8 p.m. Well, the government's latest coronavirus figures for the UK show there were 93,045 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. That's the highest daily figure recorded so far in the pandemic. On average, 68,176 cases were reported per day in the past week. 7,611 people were in hospital with COVID yesterday. There were 111 deaths, that's of people who died within 28 days of a positive test, which means the average number of deaths over the past 7 days was 113. The total number of people who have died with COVID now stands at 147,048. Today's data for booster jabs hasn't been released yet. The First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, says people must brace themselves for the storm of Omicron. He has announced more COVID restrictions to try to slow the spread of the new variant. Wales has so far confirmed around 100 cases of Omicron and has not yet had the dramatic increase in cases being seen in England and Scotland. But from the 27th of December, all nightclubs in Wales will be closed. Social distancing in offices and shops will be reintroduced. There'll also be a 2-metre rule in workplaces and one-way systems in shops. Face masks are still required in most places and on public transport. Well, Hal Griffith is in Abergavenny for us now. Hal.
Sophie, there's plenty of festive cheer here, but for businesses it's all tinged with some jangling nerves. Today they learnt the new rules for December the 27th onwards, but there's an expectation that more measures could soon follow. And even before we get to that date, people are being advised to limit their social interactions. Families once again having to make tough decisions and scale back their celebrations. Christmas isn't cancelled. It just got a lot smaller. The Welsh Government wants people to minimise their mixing, trim back the festive timetable, and that's before the new rules come in on December the 27th.
It's a shame because last Christmas was small and we were hoping that this Christmas with a new baby and children that we'd be able to see lots of people, but it might not be that way.
It's sad for families that, grandparents who haven't seen grandchildren for a very long time, and yeah, it's disappointing.
After December the 27th, the 2-metre rule will return for businesses. Old signs back in force before the new year. Nightclubs will have to close down completely. Tighter rules were considered for pubs, bars and restaurants, but the Welsh Government says Westminster won't give it the cash to support it.
These schemes should be available for all nations when they are needed, and not just at the point when restrictions are introduced in England.
Omicron has brought us to another crossroads in this pandemic, and once again the Welsh Government has gone further than the rest of the UK with its restrictions, something people living in a border town like Abergavenny are acutely aware of. Babu says he would prefer the freedom of businesses in England, but he knows Omicron has already hit hospitality across the UK. Half of his Christmas Day customers have already cancelled. He fears more will follow if restrictions are increased.
If they impose a strict rule, I think the hospitality business will die out. And if I have to close, I'll have to close.
Even tighter rules could come next week, but there's uncertainty here over whether they'll bring salvation. Hywel Griffith, BBC News, Abergavenny.
The Chancellor Rishi Sunak has been meeting business representatives after cutting short a trip to America. They're calling for urgent help from the government as the wave of COVID hits both retail and hospitality hard. Hotels and restaurants have reported large numbers of cancellations at one of their busiest times of the year. Danny Savage reports from Leeds.
At the Pack Horse in central Leeds this morning, they were getting ready for what should be the busiest day of the year.
It's very hard when Boris is telling you to work from home, etc. People are getting worried, and they're going to be worried, obviously. I'm pretty worried for my business, obviously, because it's going to be a lot quieter, I think. But I've got all the staff in today to make sure that Mad Friday is Mad Friday, and we go full force at it.
And shortly after 11 this morning, the first customers were in. Everyone fully aware of COVID, but also wanting that traditional Christmas drink.
I've toned down my plan for today. We were supposed to be out all day and go to another function this evening, so I'm going home around tea time before the town gets too busy.
Just kind of carrying on, I'm double jabbed and boosted, so just got to mitigate the risks as much as possible.
Round the corner, Jane and Pat carefully planned their Christmas meet-up.
I took a lateral flow test when I got up this morning, just to make sure I was okay and that there were no danger to my friend. I want to protect my friend as well as myself.
What was happening was people were starting to want to pull out of the party.
Catherine employs 70 people, but reluctantly cancelled this week's work Christmas party.
And I just thought it was terrible if somebody went back, got COVID, and then perhaps couldn't go home, spend Christmas with the mum, the dad, the grandparents. So I wanted to preserve their family Christmas, because we can have another Christmas party at another time.
At this stage in December, these shopping streets should be busier, but retailers like this one in Northampton could really do with some bumper days.
It's even more important this year, just to bring as much money in as we can so we can fight another day. It's definitely affected it in the last week or two. Not so many people around.
Staff being hit by COVID is a worry too.
The biggest thing that retailers are certainly worried about and monitoring on a daily, almost hourly basis is absence rates, because that is really critical when the labour market is so tight at this time of year.
Yes. Back in Leeds, the manager here says this well-ventilated marquee has saved his business, but they're being strict on cancellations.
We sent an email on Tuesday to everyone who's booked in December, and it basically told them, you will be charged if you don't let us know. Please let us know in any other circumstances. And we've had probably 150 cancel, but we've got, like I said, 6,000 bookings, so 150 is not really that bad.
Hospitality bosses aren't feeling this festive. Businesses are looking for help again from the government in the form of tax breaks, but they haven't come yet. Danny Savage, BBC News, Leeds.
The time is 6:20. Our top story this evening. Boris Johnson says he takes personal responsibility for the Conservatives' crushing defeat in the North Shropshire by-election.
And I'm at Tottenham as sport grapples with rising cases, fixture postponements and the ongoing effects of COVID.
Coming up in Sports Day in the next 15 minutes on the BBC News channel, we'll look at how the rise in COVID-19 cases have impacted football fixtures across the UK. The Premier League, Football League and WSL have all been hit.
A 27-year-old woman has been arrested on suspicion of child neglect after 4 children died in a house fire in South London last night. 60 firefighters were called to a house in Sutton. London Fire Brigade confirmed that 2 sets of twin boys, aged 3 and 4, were the only people in the house when they arrived. An investigation is underway to find out how the blaze began. Helena Wilkinson reports from the scene.
The 4 little boys who were killed in the fire, named locally as Kyson, Bryson, Leighton and Logan. They were found alone inside the house when crews arrived. Richard Dawes is a neighbour.
The fire brigade came out onto the roof, they broke the window, smoke came out, came through the back of my house into the front, and by that time the fire brigade had gone in through the front door and they started to they had a look round and they brought the 4 children out.
The scale of the emergency response was huge. 60 firefighters tackled the intense flames. They ripped through the entire ground floor. The children were taken to hospital. It is there where they died. Emergency services are used to dealing with difficult incidents. This, though, has been felt deeply.
Our London Fire Brigade colleagues acted heroically in recovering their children, and I want to pay particular tribute to them. I know this incident will have a lasting impact on them and on the police officers and paramedics who were involved.
Flowers, teddies and messages of sympathy have been left here. 2 of the boys' nursery teachers were among those who came. They said the children's Christmas presents had been waiting for them. The primary school, attended by the 4-year-old twins, said the school and its entire community are devastated at the news of the tragic loss of the 4 children. At the scene, investigations continue tonight into how the fire started, as this community comes to terms with such a tragic loss of 4 little boys days before Christmas. Helena Wilkinson, BBC News, Sutton.
A man who stabbed to death one of the UK's richest men and attacked his own mother, leaving her paralysed, has been found guilty of murder. Thomas Schreiber, who's 35, killed the hotelier Sir Richard Sutton, who was 83, at his home in Dorset in April. Andrew Plant reports.
April this year, armed police responding to calls for help at a mansion set deep in the Dorset countryside.
Right, blood. Someone with me! From me! Advance smoke to the blood! Advance smoke to the blood! Cover on right! Yeah, got it.
Inside, Sir Richard Sutton had been fatally stabbed. His partner, Anne Schreiber, knifed multiple times, her spinal cord partially severed. After the attack, Thomas Schreiber packed a suitcase and fled to London, his car tracked from a police helicopter. Before he was arrested by armed police, he sent this chilling voice message to a friend.
I've made a mistake, I've let my anger get the best of me, and I've killed my mother, and I've killed her partner, and this is the last you'll ever hear from me.
Thomas Schreiber thought he'd killed his mother, but Anne Schreiber survived. She's now paralysed. Giving evidence from a spinal unit, she said her son had always had a furious temper. In court, witnesses said Thomas Schreiber felt hatred towards his mother and Sir Richard, convinced he'd been unfairly treated when it came to money. Sir Richard Sutton owned a property empire, including the Sheraton Hotel on Park Lane and the Athenaeum in Mayfair. Sir Richard Sutton died from a stab wound that penetrated 12 centimetres into his heart. Anne Schreiber described what she remembered from that night, saying her son appeared behind her with wild eyes. As he was stabbing her, she said, it was like he wasn't really there. Thomas Schreiber will be sentenced for murder and attempted murder on Monday. Andrew Plant, BBC News.
Cricket and England are in trouble in the second Ashes test in Adelaide. Australia piled on the runs before declaring on 473 for 9 as it got dark in the day-night game. As night fell, so did England's wickets, both opening batsmen out for just 17 runs before a thunderstorm intervened in the end the second day early. And this weekend's football fixtures have been badly hit by COVID, with numerous games off because of outbreaks among staff and players at clubs. Laura Scott is at Tottenham, one of the few games in the Premier League still due to go ahead on Sunday. Laura.
Well, as things stand, Sophie, and things have changed very quickly this week, Tottenham are due to play Liverpool here on Sunday. 5 of this week's Premier League games have been called off. And it's not just the Premier League. Half of English Football League fixtures have been postponed this weekend due to COVID, and tennis and rugby union are also affected. But the fixture chaos and a recent surge in cases in the Premier League have led to calls for a so-called circuit breaker, with some managers and players favouring a break of a few weeks. But there's resistance from others, and league bosses are keen to keep the show on the road. There were similar debates last December, but one club chief executive told me tonight that the momentum behind a circuit breaker are greater than they ever were last year. There is a fresh push to encourage players to get vaccinated after it emerged yesterday that a quarter of EFL players don't intend to get jabbed. But given the congested calendar over Christmas and uncontrollable outbreaks at some squads, club bosses will meet Premier League bosses on Monday to discuss how best to manage this ever-worsening crisis.
Laura, thank you. Now, it's the Strictly Come Dancing final tomorrow night, but the TV presenter, AJ Odudu, and her partner, Kai Widrington, have been forced to pull out of the final show. AJ has torn a ligament in her right ankle. She has been on crutches this week, but today it was confirmed she won't be dancing. She says she is deeply upset that she can't perform. It means there are just 2 couples left in the competition. Rose Ayling-Ellis, the first deaf contestant to take part in the series, and John Waite, the first man to dance in a same-sex couple. Nikki Fox has been talking to them both about breaking down barriers.
Making history as the first deaf contestant on Strictly Come Dancing, Rose Ayling-Ellis has changed the game. Moments like this, dancing in silence, has busted myths about what it's really like to be deaf.
You know that being deaf, there's nothing wrong, it's such a joy to be deaf.
Rose has introduced millions to British Sign Language, and just by being on the show, made it more accessible on and off camera.
I feel really proud of that, and I did that while enjoying myself, and that's so lovely. I didn't have to fight for it, it just happened, and that's what it should be like for all other disabilities. What are we doing?
But for deaf and disabled actors like Rose, there are many barriers in the way to achieving success.
I've been to auditions in a property that is not accessible.
This film has been made by a group of people who all work in the industry, and they're fed up.
Having disabled loo as my green room because the green room's up 2 flights of stairs, so we thought we'd put you a mat down on the floor here in the toilet.
Jack, what is the state of the industry for deaf and disabled talent?
It's pretty abysmal right now. There is exclusion everywhere. The efforts being made to solve that exclusion are pitiful.
Is seeing somebody like Rose on Strictly, is that enough?
It's not enough, but it is glorious.
Rose isn't the only contestant this year breaking down barriers. John and Johannes are Strictly's first all-male couple.
I was wondering how you both feel about being part of what is definitely the most diverse Strictly final that there has ever been.
It's an honour, you know, to be part of this. We've got Rose representing the deaf community,
AJ's a proud black woman. And we're a same-sex couple, but an interracial couple. It just goes to show how far society has come.
10.
Even though AJ has had to pull out of the final due to injury, all three couples have shown that by expressing themselves through dance every single week, celebrating what makes them who they are is what's got them to this point. Nikki Fox, BBC News.
Time now for a look at the weather with Stav Danaos.
Thanks very much, Sophie. Good evening to you. We've had mixed fortunes of weather today. Some glorious sunshine across parts of Scotland, northern England. Elsewhere has been rather cloudy. And tonight, where we have the clear skies, some dense mist and fog patches will develop. Certainly across northern, eastern England, it could be problematic tomorrow morning. Where the skies are clear, those temperatures falling below freezing. But elsewhere, Northern Ireland, most of Wales and England will be cloudy and generally mild, with temperatures no lower than 5 to 8 degrees, but much colder further north, as you can see. We've still got this blocking area of high pressure, which will be around with us through Saturday and into Sunday, tending to drift a little bit further northwards. That will allow something a bit cooler to spread down across the North Sea, mainly to northern and eastern areas, and I think that will be noticeable through Sunday afternoon. But for many, it's going to be a dry weekend. Some areas seeing some sunshine, other areas staying pretty cloudy and gloomy with a little bit of drizzle at times. That's certainly been the case for Northern Ireland, large parts of England and Wales. Again, some of that cloud thick enough, the odd spot of rain that we've had today, drizzle I should say. Some dense fog patches lingering through northern and eastern England, but some sunshine further north like we've seen today. Here a little bit cooler where we have the thicker cloud. Temperatures of 9 to 11 degrees. Saturday night, pretty similar to what's happening tonight. Most places cloudy, misty and murky, and generally frost-free where you have the cloud, but the higher ground, northern England, Wales and Scotland will be poking out above the low cloud. So here, clearer skies, so a touch of frost again likely. So for Sunday then, spot the difference. Most places dry again, thanks to that area of high pressure. A lot of cloud around, limited sunshine, probably the best of its central northern areas. And that slightly cooler northeasterly wind will be noticeable across northern and eastern coasts. So those temperatures will be a notch down across the board. It stays fine and chilly as we head on into next week. Our high pressure continues to hold on. Sophie.
Stav, thank you. And that's all from the BBC News at 6 now on BBC One. It's time to join the BBC's news teams where you are. Goodbye.